do one thing and one thing only, which is I fight the government. After a certain amount of time has passed, it becomes harder for the government to come after you. A lot of people think, oh man, once those 3 years have passed, the government can't touch me. I see CRA come after people for transactions that were 5 years old, 10 years old. I've seen 20 years old. They think, oh, if I have a good case, that means the CRA won't bother me. If you get an audit letter from aggressive tax planning department, you're done for. We'll fight it, but you're headed to litigation. That first request usually is benign, but after that, you can tell where it's going.
What would you say is some of the biggest misconceptions clients have around CRA disputes in general?
The one thing that everyone always thinks is...
Alrighty, well, welcome to the latest episode of The Upside with Eli. I'm joined today with Dove Whitman, tax lawyer at KPMG. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to chatting with you for a while. I think today's going to be a fun and interesting and exciting episode, especially with everything that's going on.
Excellent.
So I just for people who don't know who Dove is, I'm just going to read off an intro and you let me know any other cool and interesting things we should tell people about. But Dove is a partner in KPMG Law's tax litigation and dispute resolution practice.
Yep.
And you represent high net worth individuals, mining companies, pharmaceutical companies, private equity firms, and financial institutions in disputes with the CRA and Revenue Quebec. And your focus areas include aggressive tax planning, complex financial transactions, mining, taxation, transfer pricing, and GST and HST. So you've done your master's in education from McGill, called to the bar in Quebec in 2016, and you've completed the CPA's in-depth tax course, which is a pretty massive undertaking.
Absolutely, yeah, 3 years.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. So how did you go from a master's in education to fighting the CRA on behalf of taxpayers?
That is a great question. So, as you can tell, law is my second career. So when I did the master's in education, I was actually working as a teacher. And that was my previous job. I did it for quite a while. And after a time, I just started to feel like I needed something with more of a challenge and more of a development plan, opportunity for growth. And I remember one day, I was, it was about 15 years ago, I guess, or 12 years ago. I was just talking to someone and saying, would be nice to do something else. And he said, if you could do anything, what would you do? And I said, law always seemed kind of interesting. And he said, well, why don't you do it? I said, you're right. So I went home that night. And I applied to law school. And when I got in, I quit my job and I never looked back.
Crazy.
I know.
Didn't take long to make the jump then.
No, it really didn't. It was a very, honestly, easiest decision of my life and probably the best decision I've ever made.
And so at what point in law school then did you decide that you wanted to kind of go more heavy into tax?
So that's a really good question. So it was in my second year of law school is when I took my first tax course.
Okay.
And at the time, I didn't know anything about tax. I was like, okay, I'm sure it's going to be like a boring course, but probably it's just a basic course, which is good to have. And literally after the first day of that class, I was hooked. I said, this is the best thing I ever found. I read the entire book, and the footnotes cover to cover. And I don't know, it was just the most amazing thing.
Was it like a specific case or like something in particular that you were just like, man, this is sweet?
The thing that I like about tax, and I'll give you an example of a case in a second. The thing that I like about tax is I find it's very technical, but it's also kind of philosophical. And, it actually touches every aspect of life. And it asks really interesting questions about why people do things. It's not just adding up numbers. So I'll give you an example. There's this one case, it was a case that I learned about in law school called Rashfalowski.
Okay.
And it was a case where a company had given a golf club membership to one of its employees. And the question was whether the golf club membership was a taxable benefit.
Okay.
And essentially the taxpayer who had received the golf club membership argued, he said, I don't like to play golf. I hate golf. I have no interest in doing this. My employer just made me do it because they think it looks good. And he won. He won.
Interesting.
The court said the guy doesn't like golf. It's not a benefit for the employee. It's only a benefit for the employer. I was like, okay, this is interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Because most people know that, or most people think, especially golf in general, that it's not tax deductible in the same way a lot of other potential client engagement type of events are.
Exactly.
Cool. Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Right on. KPMG, it's interesting that you're there because it's more commonly known as an accounting firm, but obviously you're a tax lawyer. And so I guess which is interesting because I've met lots of tax lawyers in lots of different kind of areas, but you have kind of a really unique, I guess, exposure to stuff being kind of internal at a large accounting firm. So what do you find are some of like the neat and interesting things that you get exposure to that maybe certain people in big law wouldn't, and why and how did you end up kind of with KPMG?
It's a great question. So I'll answer the second question first. So I did start my career at Davies Ward. So a very traditional big law firm. Also, very, very, very well reputed. But there's something that you can get in an accounting firm, especially from a KPMG, that you just can't get somewhere else, which is if you're going to practice in tax, the sheer number of tax people and tax professionals that we have access to. I mean, we have a whole floor of U.S. tax, a floor of transfer pricing, a floor of indirect tax. We got like any question I have, I just walk down the hall and they're right there.
Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. You get to work with so many different professionals in so many different offices. I mean, offices all around the world. It really opens up a lot. And also, when it comes to credibility and reputation, it's such an easy sell to clients because everyone knows KPMG. And, when you're talking tax, everyone trusts KPMG when it comes to tax. So very easy sell.
Yeah. And so have you found that from building your practice from a practice standpoint, I guess it's obviously elevated the type of advice you can give, having access to kind of all of these different individuals as opposed challenges? I mean, it sounds like it's only positives.
It's only positives. The only challenge is there are some additional regulatory challenges, right? And that comes mainly from the fact that KPMG, like the other big four, audits publicly traded companies. So there are a lot of rules about acting in litigation capacities for publicly traded companies. Many of the rules come from like the SEC and stuff like that. So we always have to be mindful of those kind of conflicts.
Gotcha.
But other than that, no, it's just amazing.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
And so for people who don't necessarily know, kind of your details and kind of your background as much, obviously you went into the tax side of law. How would you describe exactly what you actually do? Because there's lots of different tax lawyers out there. You work in dispute resolution, you litigate against CRA. What does that actually mean from a potential client perspective?
Okay, so I always say that I do one thing and one thing only, which is I fight the government. That's it. It's always,
people will like to hear that.
They do like to hear that because you know what? The government needs fighting. Someone needs to check them. And that's literally all that we do. Often it's in court. It's not always, but often it's in court. But fighting takes on a number of different roles, and it looks like a lot of different things. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes it's going to court. Sometimes it's meeting with the lawyers from the government. Sometimes it's spending time on the phone with them. But it's always about arguing with them, trying to achieve a better result for the clients. That's always what it is.
Cool. So walk me through what litigation actually looks like. So CRA sends a reassessment, or is it, you get an audit? Like, when do you get kind of involved in the process? And what is the process from potentially a reassessment or an audit to actually being in front of a judge and having to kind of fight on this?
Excellent question. I always say it's never too early for us to get involved, and it's never too late for us to get involved.
Okay.
So there are times when we've gotten involved even before someone has even done the transaction that gives rise to the audit. And there have been other times where I've been called a month before trial. You know, it runs the gamut. Obviously, the earlier we get involved, the better. And practically speaking, that means at the beginning of the audit phase. Like one thing that I see a lot is when we get involved after the audit phase, a lot of money has already been spent and probably thrown out. Often a lot of ill will has been generated between the taxpayer and the tax authorities. And sometimes the taxpayers have gotten themselves into messes that is harder to get them out of.
Sure.
So it's always ideal at a minimum to get us involved at the beginning of an audit. That's for sure.
Because I feel like a lot of people here, okay, I got to bring something like that in if I'm going to fight after the audit's done, after everything's kind of gone through. And you're in the unique scenario where a lot of the tax planning that might actually be occurring, you might even be involved in that process. Because again, if you're the guy fighting it at the end of the day, you should be involved, as early as possible to be able to say, hey, this is above board, this isn't, this is kind of how this could potentially play out. So you could outweigh the risks and everything.
Very
But
much
in
so.
my experience, when people bring you in, it's definitely in the later part, even if the encouragement is to do it significantly sooner.
Right, right. I think, people are often either they're just not aware or they can be in denial. A lot of people think, oh, this is a simple issue. I can resolve it myself, which I understand why they think that. But then inevitably they're not able to, and then they call us at some point.
Yeah, makes sense. Fair enough.
Yeah.
What and so obviously, there can be settlements with CRA. Obviously, it can go to, it can go through, and be in front of a judge, and however that gets resolved. But what is there a certain portion that you see that gets settled versus having to go through that full process, or what does that typically look like from a client perspective?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say for me specifically, like the answer for everybody is different
Yeah.
because everyone has different proclivities and predispensations. I very much like going to court. I like going to court and I'm not afraid of going to court. So many of my cases, probably the majority of my cases, have some court involvement. Um, Now, it's not always the right move for the client, and I will never advise someone to go to court if I don't think it's the right move. But often when people come to me, it's because they know that's where we can really shine in the courtroom, in that kind of litigation.
Yeah, fair enough. And
Yeah.
on the CRA lawyers that you're typically, kind of arguing against or kind of looking at, what is a lot of their background? Are they from kind of law firms, or do they start out just kind of work there, or is it a large variety of, I guess, different backgrounds that you're kind of dealing with?
The people that work in the government, for the most part, have been in government their whole lives. Like it's
Okay.
more common for people to go from government to private practice, and it's less common for people to go from private practice to government.
Yeah, because one of the questions we often get from people is, who are these people at CRA that are arguing against me? Like, what are their kind of their backgrounds? What are their education levels? What is their actual understanding? Because CRA makes mistakes all the time,
Oh,
right?
of
So I'm
course.
always kind of curious from your perspective of, yeah, like what is the background of kind of these individuals? So that makes sense, right? That people usually start out in government, go to private practice instead of the other way
Exactly.
around.
One thing that's interesting, which I'll tell you, which I learned a little while ago, was sometimes the Department of Justice are the ones who are the lawyers for the CRA.
Okay.
So sometimes they do have issues with staffing, and when they've had that, they take lawyers from other departments. So many of the junior lawyers in the tax litigation department at DOJ don't have any tax background or minimal tax background. They come from immigration, from other areas. So, that's kind of an interesting situation, but yeah.
Yeah, just a whole nother reason why going to court can sometimes be in your favor if you're dealing with, potentially inexperience or people who don't have, the extensive background that you actually have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What would you say is kind of some of the biggest misconceptions clients have around CRA kind of disputes in general?
That's a good question. I'll tell you. The one thing that everyone always thinks is they think that the tax court is just an extension of the CRA.
Okay.
And they say, oh, it's just the government. So why is the court going to say anything different than the CRA? The court just always going to agree with the CRA. And the truth is that the CRA loses in court just as much as they win. The tax court really does not give much deference to the fact that, oh, it's the government that said it. So it's really the best chance that anyone has to actually get a fair shake and get a better result. Like the CRA, they have administrative internal dispute mechanisms, but those are rarely going to yield any fruit. They're not going to change their mind and say, hey, we're wrong. But a court will say, no, CRA, you're wrong.
And we see that all the time, right? Where
Absolutely.
we get and because it's constantly changing and evolving and growing as well.
Yeah,
That makes a lot of sense.
very much so. Yeah.
What are some of the most common things that clients don't realize they should contest with the CRA? So you've been reassessed or however it kind of plays out, and they just accept that, right? What are some of the most common things you see people accepting that you're like, you should really push back on that?
Right, right. Well, it's actually kind of interesting. The area where I think people don't think enough to contest is actually even before that stage. It's actually at the audit stage.
Okay.
And people don't realize that there's a lot you can contest even at the audit stage. Just because the government asks you for something doesn't automatically mean you should give it. A lot of
Interesting.
times there are improper requests or overly broad requests or unreasonable requests that you can actually push back on. And that's why I say it's very important to get us involved at the audit stage, because we can tell you, hey, this is something you should give. This is something you should push back on.
And do you find most clients just default to giving everything because they assume that they're required to?
So I would say that clients fall into one of two categories. Okay.
Okay.
Either they get real scared of the government and they say, oh my God, it's the government. I got to give them everything. Right. And sometimes they'll give even extra. They'll say, oh, I better start explaining why I did this and why I thought that. And they'll give all kinds of stuff and all kinds of explanations. That's one kind, which is no good. The other kind are the people who do the exact opposite, the other extreme. They say, who's the government to ask me for anything? They have no right. It's my business. It's not their business. I'm not going to give them anything. That also is not really going to end well. So both of those two responses are really not helpful. And one of the things that we can help with is say, this is where you should give, and this is where you should push back.
Yeah, which is invaluable kind of advice, and I can already picture all of those people and having dealt with many of them
Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Listen, people get very, very mad when the government audits them. And I don't blame them, because these audits are very onerous and very broad. So people understandably get very frustrated.
yeah.
I
It's
understand.
it's time consuming, it's expensive, and a lot of the
Absolutely.
time, in our experience, when audits go through, they're business owners, there's people with busy lives and lots of different things they're already juggling. So to
Of course.
add, kind of insult to injury, it just it's never an opportune time to get audited by CRA, that's for sure.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. What do you feel like are some of the most common things that clients want to contest with the CRA, but they probably shouldn't?
That's a good question. I mean, one of the things that people think a lot about have to do with old transactions. Okay. So a lot of people think that, or a lot of people are familiar with the concept of what we call statute barred, which means that after a certain amount of time has passed, it becomes harder for the government to come after you. Okay. Now, a lot of people think that that's a silver bullet. They think, oh man, once those 3 years have passed, the government can't touch me. And then when the government does come and touch them, first of all, they're shocked. But then they think, oh man, but this is ridiculous. The government for sure is not going to win no matter what. Like they think that the government has no chance. But what we always have to explain to people is no, yes, it is true that when the government is late, they have a harder case to meet. But you should not just say, well, they're for sure going to lose. No, they could win. They win a lot. They win a lot even in these kinds of cases. So even cases where it's an old transaction, and we're seeing that more and more. I see CRA come after people for transactions that were 5 years old, 10 years old. I've seen 20 years old. Imagine the CRA comes after you for something you did 20 years ago.
And is that
What?
typically in the event of like fraud, or is that just in general they can go back that far?
Well, it's in the event of what they call fraud. But what you and I call fraud and what they call fraud are not the same thing. And that's the problem. That's the problem. So the fact that you may have a good case is not going to stop you from having to go to court and having to fight it. You might win and you might have a good chance to win, but it's still going to cost you all that money and all that time until you get to the end of the road. And I think that's what people don't understand sometimes. They think, oh, if I have a good case, that means the CRA won't bother me. No, it just means that you might win, but it's still going to cost you a lot of money and it's still going to take you a lot of time and cause you a lot of frustration throughout the process.
And so what are your recommendations to people in terms of record keeping then? For a lot of people think, I just got to keep receipts or, transaction history for, X number of years. What is your recommendation in general then?
It's a good question. I always tell people never throw anything out. Never. No, not 6 years, not 10 years, never. Because you're going to have this exact problem. And I've had many, many cases where people, the CRA or Revenue Quebec or whomever comes after a taxpayer 5, 6, 10 years, and they don't have any documentation anymore. And it's still up to the taxpayer to show that what he did is correct. So it makes a very, very difficult time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think back to running businesses in, the mid 2000s. And I think I've still got shoe boxes full of receipt in storage somewhere. Now everything's electronic, so we can keep stuff. It's really easy to keep stuff for forever. But I mean, yeah, I'm sure there's definitely lots of cases where, you're looking at stuff that was potentially pre-electronic, and you're trying to dig through all those types of things. So probably, if you haven't been doing stuff so far, it's probably a good time to start just saving absolutely everything, because apparently you just never know.
Very much so. It's unfortunate, but it's just the cost of doing business these days. And I can't tell you how many situations would have been made so much easier if the taxpayers had just kept more records.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there a moment like in an audit or in a dispute where you can tell it's about to escalate significantly? And what are some of the early warning signs?
Yeah. You can usually tell pretty early on in the audit. And you can tell generally by the nature of the initial audit request or the kind of audit request. So the very first request you ever get might be something like a very routine request. They ask for, the minute books and the resolutions and that stuff. But then you'll provide that and then you'll see what they come back with. And then you're going to see, either you'll see that it gets referred to a different department. Like if you get an audit letter from, let's say, aggressive tax planning department, you're done for it. Okay. That means you're headed to litigation no matter what. Right. We'll fight it, but you're headed to litigation.
Okay.
If you start to see that they say, hey, you know what, now we're looking at this transaction specifically, that's when you have an idea that, okay, they're focusing on something, so that first request usually is benign, but after that, you can tell where it's going.
Okay. Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
How do you decide whether to fight a reassessment or advise a client to settle even when you think you could win?
Very good question. I mean, really, it's just based on two things, right? It's based on how likely we think we are to win and how much money is involved. It really depends on that, If it's when it's a lot of money, then obviously, even if you have a lower chance of success, you're still going to take that chance because it's just worth it.
Yeah.
The lesser the amount in dispute, the higher chance of success you need in order to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's pretty much as simple as that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Has the CRA's posture changed over the course of your career? So do you find that they're being more aggressive, more data-driven, or more willing to litigate rather than settle?
Oh, they definitely much more aggressive. I think we know over the years, their budget has increased. First of all, Parliament keeps giving them more and more money, and they keep hiring more and more people. So there's a lot of people working for CRA. They have a lot of auditors. So they're a lot more aggressive. And yes, like back in the day, they used to be very easy to settle with. You can call them up and make a deal. These days, they really don't want to do that much. They don't want to make deals. If you want to settle with them, they want you to convince them. And if they're not convinced, they won't settle. So a lot of times we say, it's not worth it to waste your breath trying to argue and settle with them better to bump it up to court. And if you want to try and settle there, settle there. Like you have a better chance of settling with the Department of Justice than you do with the CRA.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so earlier on in your career, yeah, you found that you were just settling a lot more, and now it's all right. Well, we're gonna have to take a run at this.
Yeah. Like they don't want to settle anymore. They don't really want to listen. So, you know, we often tell clients, don't waste your time with them. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your money. Let's just go straight to court.
Yeah, gotcha. And
Yeah.
are there sectors or types of transactions you're finding right now that the CRA is targeting more heavily than they were, say, 5 years ago?
I mean, it always changes. But like, let's say, for example, I saw recently Revenue Quebec made an announcement that they have an increased focus on the construction industry, which is not necessarily something new, but it is currently an area that they're focusing on. I see a lot of real estate transactions being audited. One thing that is big that I think is kind of a newer trend is life insurance stuff. Life insurance planning, CRA is really going after lately.
We've seen multiple notifications on that, yeah, for like aggressive insurance, and not just life insurance, but it's some of the other like living benefit type of insurance structures.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All the different types of products and things, the CRA really doesn't like them anymore.
Yeah.
Even though for the most part they're pretty legitimate, but
So,
Very-
many of them, yes.
Many of them
There's a few that come across my desk. I go, don't do this. It's just
for
the most
sure.
outrageous strategy I've ever seen.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of them are very legitimate, kind of planning strategies, and it goes back to document.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Have you worked on many of those insurance cases yet?
Yeah, quite a few.
Oh, have you? Okay, interesting.
Quite a few. Yeah.
And what do you find? What specific strategies are they targeting?
They target a lot of life insurance strategies where people, let's say, borrow and use the policies as collateral, where people fund it through a holdco. The thing that's surprising is that these are pretty vanilla type structures, but the CRA still is labeling them as aggressive, labeling them as tax shelters, and in my opinion, I think they're going to lose. The CRA is going to lose, but again, just because I think the CRA is going to lose doesn't mean it's not going to cost the taxpayer a lot to litigate it until the end.
And do you think that they're doing that with the intention to find other things as in part of that process, or are they specifically going after that strategy?
I think they're specifically going after that strategy. I think they've just realized that people save a lot of money and they just don't like it. And it's really, honestly, it's sad to say, I think it's an intimidation tactic to try and discourage people from doing it further.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
How is the CRA's use of things like data analytics and international information sharing changing how audits get triggered now?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of people think that, if I just don't put it in my tax return, then nobody's going to know. But it's not the case at all. Like, I'll give you an example. So I mentioned that they're focusing a lot on real estate, right? So I've seen a number of audits that were started as a result of, let's say, sales and purchases of property, but not because they were reported in the tax return, because the CRA checked the municipal indexes.
Yep.
They checked the government registries, and they say, he sold, she sold, they sold the house. Let's ask some questions. Like the fact that you don't put something in your return honestly doesn't make anything easier. They get information. They have tax, information exchange agreements with so many countries. They get the Swiss bank account. Like they get almost everything these days. So there's really very little that you can do from a reporting point of view to escape an audit.
I'd say that's probably one of the most common tactics that gets, it fills my comment sections of like, well, just don't tell CRA, right? And it's like, it's they're reportable transactions, right? Whether they're getting the information, like you're selling farms, family cottages, that kind of stuff. You're just changing names on title, like that stuff all gets reported. And you may get away with it, but again, that's definitely where we see, and I think people just assume that's just like a silver bullet. You can do that to avoid any kind of taxation, and it just couldn't be further from the truth. And you're unnecessarily opening yourself up to those additional audits.
Absolutely. And especially talking about the kinds of things you're talking about, if you do a transaction with another person, you might not report it, but what if they do?
Yeah.
Then it's even worse.
Yeah.
It's even
Then
worse.
it's very obvious. Yeah.
Yeah,
Again,
of course.
another one that we see again in the comment section. Just don't tell. They're going to find out. There's
Yeah.
certain ways that you can be more aggressive or just take advantage of the opportunities, and then there's just outright lying and doing stuff that's just going to shoot yourself in the foot.
It never works.
Yeah. Do you think Revenue Quebec and the CRA are converging in how aggressively they pursue disputes, or do you think they still operate quite differently?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. I mean, they're definitely both very aggressive. Um, the one thing which is interesting is that in a certain way, Revenue Quebec is easier to deal with just from an administrative point of view. Like I'll give you just it's a silly example, but it's a useful example. Like if you want to contact CRA, right? The only way to do it is you can call them on the phone, right? You can send them a letter or send them a fax. Like they still use faxes.
Yeah.
That's how you contact them, right? It's kind of crazy. Revenue Quebec, everything is email.
Really?
Everything is email, secure email. It makes life so much easier to be able to just email the auditor, get an email back instead of having to play phone tag. When you're trying to reach CRA, you end up playing phone tag for a week before you get somebody back on the phone.
You're lucky if it's a week sometimes.
I know. And if you ever call the general line, be prepared to sit on hold for hours, right?
Yeah, we used to tell people call the Newfoundland office at 6 a.m. because that's the office that's most likely to pick up first thing in the morning. Yeah.
Exactly. So the one thing I'll say about Revenue Quebec is they are very easy to get a hold of.
Okay.
Very easy to get a hold of. So that's something at least. But in
But
terms of
in terms of aggression and how hard they're coming after, they're pretty similar.
just as hard, yeah,
Yeah.
just as
Gotcha. Some of the more specialized areas that you work in, things like transfer pricing. What do you find, in terms of transfer pricing disputes, right? They can turn into like multi-year, multi-jurisdictional fights. Like,
yeah.
what makes those cases so much harder than more straightforward reassessments?
Ooh. Transfer pricing is a very interesting beast because we always say that transfer pricing, it's not really about the law at all. The provisions of the Income Tax Act about transfer pricing are very short and very clear.
And sorry, not to cut you off, but for anyone listening, what do you explain what transfer pricing is?
Okay, so transfer pricing just means that when you have, let's just say, a Canadian company that is doing business with a United States subsidiary, for example, and they're charging an amount or paying an amount that the government thinks is unreasonable, then the government says, really what you're doing is you're shifting income or shifting expenses out of Canada, and we're going to reassess you based on what we think the right price should be. That's basically what happens. So what that means is that the dispute is a question of what is the right price. That's really the question. And that's a purely economic question. And part of the rules of transfer pricing require a lot of what's called contemporaneous documentation. So they require reports to be prepared and accounting firms prepare 100-page reports because there's all of these different economic approaches to how should companies charge, and it depends on the product, depends what it is. So it becomes a very, very, very fact-intensive exercise. It's a lot of questions of what are other companies charging? What would a reasonable third party charge, right? These are very difficult questions to answer, and it just takes a lot of evidence. So these fights become very costly and very voluminous, not because the law is complicated, because the facts are complicated and because the facts evolve. What could have been the case 5 years ago might not be the case anymore.
And so what do you think, or what do you kind of advise people should be doing to, I guess, get all their ducks in a row, or like what type of documentation should they be obtaining in a lot of those transactions?
Well, at a minimum, really the best thing is to have, it's usually an accounting firm, but it could be other firms, prepare an actual transfer pricing report. The actual transfer pricing report is going to set out all the different methodologies and set out why this methodology was chosen, is going to set out all of the facts and all of the bases. And again, it doesn't guarantee that the CRA won't come after you. and
Yeah,
doesn't guarantee that you'll win. But if you end up being involved in a transfer pricing dispute, you're going to wish that you have a transfer pricing report.
sure.
You're
Yeah,
gonna wish.
that makes
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
In terms of other specialized practice areas, where is the actual line between, quote unquote, aggressive tax planning and something that crosses into like abusive avoidance? Is that line as clear in practice as it sounds in theory? And I think, the issue is we see so many of these, financial influencers online that some people are saying, no, like the Tax Act is law and it's, specific rules. People say there's tons of gray areas and it's open to interpretation, and you get all these different perspectives on it.
Yeah, unfortunately, nobody really knows. That's the problem. That's the problem. Because, on the one hand, we do have these laws and, there's one or the other, right? But then there's these anti-avoidance ideas where the courts can say, or the government can say, look, even though what you're doing is technically legal, but it's not in the spirit of the law. And if it's not in the spirit of the law, then we can deny it. But the question of what is the spirit of the law, I mean, nobody really knows, right? Because it requires, at a minimum, two stages. First, you have to identify what the spirit of the law is. And then second, you have to say, well, does this violate the spirit of the law? And that's why you end up with such wildly different decisions from the courts. And even, you have decisions from the tax court and decisions from the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court. There's a lot of divergence. Everyone likes to say that the anti-avoidance rules are a black box. Nobody really knows, or it's a black box, or the other thing they call it is it's a smell test,
Yeah,
which
sure.
is unfortunate because it's not how it should be. People should be entitled to have a little bit of predictability and certainty in their affairs, but it becomes very, very subjective. So it's very hard to know beforehand, does this look bad or does it not look bad? What is the judge going to say? Nobody really knows.
And do you think that's part of the reason why CRA is escalating things so much nowadays, because they know that people aren't going to fight it or don't have the funds to fight it or don't have the time and effort to kind of fight it?
Oh, absolutely. I'm certain that the CRA relies on that. They rely on the fact that when people get reassessments or audits, a lot of people say, hey, if the government says they owe the money, they must be right. Like, a lot of people don't even realize that you can fight the government. That's the
Sure.
problem. They don't realize you can. They think, well, the government said that, they probably calculated that I probably owe it. And then if it's 10,000, 20,000, if it's, not millions and millions of dollars, people say, oh, I'm not going to fight it, right?
Yeah.
So the government absolutely relies on that. They know that and they rely on that.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to film this episode and to kind of hear your perspective on things too,
Yeah.
right? Because I think, again, people just assume that it's a big government and and what they say I have to follow, otherwise there's repercussions, and they don't realize that people like you are literally have devoted their entire lives and careers to helping people out of those types of situations.
Quite true.
Without naming clients, is there a case that changed how you approach disputes going forward, or any major kind of cases that really taught you something? Either in a good way or a hard way.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one thing that I've definitely learned the hard way is not to be overconfident coming out of a courtroom. Because a lot of times you'll come out of a courtroom and you say, wow, like it went so well. The judge really understood. He asked all the right questions. He gave the government a hard time. And then you get the decision and you lose, So we like to think that we know how to read judges and can tell what they're thinking. We can't, and
Interesting.
which is a credit to the judges, right? It means that they're doing their job well. They're really being impartial. They're trying to get to the bottom of it. You just can't tell sometimes. Yeah.
What's the most surprising argument that you've seen work in tax court? Something that kind of shouldn't have succeeded on paper, but it did.
I'll tell you a good one.
If you can share it, yeah.
I can. Yeah. This was one that I came up with one time. And it was a Hail Mary situation because the client literally had no other alternative. And I came up with this argument, and I was almost sure we were going to be laughed out of court, but actually the judge found it very interesting. And essentially it was a question about, like, it was a very procedural question about whether we should be granted an extension of time to file an appeal. And essentially, I argued that to deny the extension was a constitutional problem. And it was a constitutional problem of access to justice. And I based it on a specific case and whatever. And I was sure we had no chance. It was just something to placate the client, say, look, we have no chance, but we'll try. I don't know. The judge liked it. I don't know what to tell you.
And the client was happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right on. How much of winning a tax dispute is about the law versus about managing the narrative and credibility of your client in front of a judge?
Very good question. Very good question. I mean, yeah, certainly when you come in front of a judge, that kind of stuff is super important, the credibility and the personal part. And it's important for two reasons. One is, obviously, like the judge has to believe you, but, when you're fighting a tax case, you also have to think about the next levels of court and let's say the appeal, because there's often going to be an appeal. And if you lose based on a legal interpretation, okay, you have one interpretation of the law, the judge has a different one. That is not as hard to appeal. You can go to the Court of Appeal and say, look, we think the judge's interpretation was wrong, and then the Court of Appeal might agree with you. But if you lose because the judge says, listen, I listened to this guy testify for a week. He looks shifty to me. I don't like the way he looks. I don't trust him. And I don't believe a word he says. When you go to the Court of Appeal and say the judge was wrong, the Court of Appeal is going to say, I don't know, like he's not in front of us. We're going to trust the judge. The judge is the one that listened to him for a week. So it's so important to make sure that you get that narrative right the first time, because you really don't have an opportunity to correct it later on. Legal issues, you can try and fix it later on. Factual issues, especially issues of credibility, like if the judge says your client was not credible, you're done.
Sure.
You're done. There's almost nothing you can do.
Yeah, gotcha. Tax disputes can drag on for years. How do you keep a client from making an emotional decision, settling too early out of exhaustion, or fighting too long out of, principle?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I mean, the one thing I'll say is, I think one of the things that we offer is peace of mind, in the sense that, yes, it still might take a while and it still might cost a lot of money, but we are the ones to worry about it. And what I tell people is, you don't have to worry about this now. Let us handle it. Let us deal with it. Most of the steps are steps that don't require the client to be directly involved. If the client wants to be obviously kept very up to date, they can be. Many people don't. Most people, they don't understand it. It just frustrates them to learn more about it. So they rather say, look, I trust you. You take care of it. Call me if you need me. And then that's it.
So they're fairly hands off for a good chunk, which I think is a huge weight off the shoulders for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Like people literally tell me that they can't sleep at night.
Yeah.
I
believe it. Some of these cases you see, and I've got, kind of one of the next questions around here is, it's like, a lot of these things can be, make or break it for people's businesses, for their livelihood, for their entire financial future, right? Can be hinging on these things. So it is a massive, emotional drain to go through these things.
Of course.
Yeah. If a business owner, a high net worth individual, could do one thing differently before they get audited to make the future dispute, quicker, far less painful, if you could just give, some of those basic things, what would you say to people in general?
Well, I would say two things. Number one is documentation. Keep everything, but not just keep everything. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, you want to think about also creating documentation, writing notes, writing explanations, writing things at the time that you do them that explain why you're doing them. I can't tell you how many cases we've seen where if only the taxpayer had written something at the time that explained why he was doing it, he would have had such a much, much easier time. So it's hard to know, because obviously it's hard to look into the future with a crystal ball and think about what the government might say. But that's where we come in. And that's where we can say, look, this transaction is legitimate, but here's where I think you might be vulnerable. Here's how you should prepare for a possible audit that might come in a few years from now. So I think that kind of thing is very important. And the other thing, which is, kind of connected to that, is get the lawyers involved as soon as possible. I know people hate lawyers. I know, but it's going to save you
We
a
we
lot
we,
of.
we like lawyers.
There you go. There you go. I like them too. It's going to save you a lot of hassle down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
With AI and automation showing up more in tax administration and even in like legal practices, where do you see tax dispute work heading in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah. I mean, AI certainly will be able to take on a lot of the administrative tasks, certainly a lot of the repetitive tasks. So there is, a good amount of, I would say, the lower level stuff AI will be able to take on. But, where we really shine is in being able to come up with creative solutions. And that's something which, I mean, look, I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you what will be, but from my understanding of where AI is and how it works, especially because it works as a probabilistic model, not really a pure reasoning model, I think it's unlikely that anytime soon AI is really going to be able to come up with the right arguments. Certainly, I don't see ChatGPT going to court anytime soon.
Well,
Um,
and it's funny, and the reason why I ask is you see all these cases now where people are representing themselves in court, and they're quoting precedent case law on a case that's not even that's fictitious, that ChatGPT or Claude or whatever
absolutely.
just kind of randomly made up. And I
Mhm.
think especially in your field with how much of it is kind of that interpretation and that like there's those areas like it's not necessarily 100% straight fact based, like it's interpretation of things that that AI, it just isn't even close, and maybe it will be one day. But I'm noticing it's causing more issues than it is solving them in your field right now, at least in our experience.
Oh, very much so. And yeah, 100%. If we talk about where it is today, it's definitely nowhere near where it needs to be. I mean, many Canadian courts have rules that if you use AI to help prepare stuff, you have to disclose it because they know that it's not reliable.
Yeah. The crazy ones are, and I'm sure you're seeing them too, is these cases that go through the courts. And it's like that
Yeah,
was
they
just a
just make up
completely
dates.
made up thing. Yeah, made
Yeah,
up names,
I've
made
seen
up
it.
dates. Yeah,
I've seen it. Made up cases, made up names, made up everything.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Interesting. Is there a tax myth or a piece of common knowledge you wish you could permanently correct that exists in in the tax sphere or in social media, or just something out there that you wish, man, I wish I could just people if people just didn't think that, or I wish I could remove that.
It's a good question. There's probably a lot. One that I see often is everyone or many people think that they can get rid of a tax problem by simply saying, "Oh, I'm just going to take all my assets and transfer them to my wife," or "I'll just take all my assets and move them out of the country," or "I'll just get rid of all my assets somehow. I'll put them in a corporation." That stuff doesn't work at all.
No.
First of all, because it's actually a criminal offense to try and evade paying tax. So that's number one. Number two, there are very specific mechanisms that allow them to look through all that stuff. If a person is really smart and years before they enter into transactions, they set up creditor proofing structures, that could be helpful. But once the government is after you, forget it.
It blows my mind how many people, with no tax background, no education, they think they found this silver bullet to, to counteract or to, circumvent all these rules. And I mean, I post a lot of content online, and it's
Right.
every video, right? There's somebody's like, just do this and you don't have to worry about it. It's like,
I know. I know. Well,
I wish I had that type of, delusional confidence. Like it must be wonderful to kind of live in that world. So I hear you 100%.
yeah. But that's why it's so important what you're doing, because I mean, I see it too. I see so many people on social media just spewing complete nonsense and telling people to do all kinds of things that will almost certainly land them in jail. So someone needs to spread the right message.
Yeah, in an ideal world, you actually don't want that many people calling you.
But
That's never going to end, and it's probably never going to slow down. It's only going to, kind of increase. But yeah, you want people to do well, and you
of
want
course,
people to save more of their hard earned money.
of course. I always tell people, if you're calling me, it's a bad situation.
Yeah, for sure. But they're lucky to have you there.
There you
Just yeah,
go.
kind of in closing. I mean, if people wanted to, I guess, get a hold of you, A, how would they get a hold of you? And B, are there specific kind of specialist areas or things that you would like people to know that you deal with or focus on?
Good question. So to find me is very easy. I mean, first of all, you can share my contact info if you want, but if you just Google my name, KPMG, you'll see it right there. You'll see me, you'll see all of my colleagues. We have a very large team, but you can find me very easily and then contact me. I'm, easy to find. Um, we really do a lot of different things, and we work on a lot of different types of transactions, a lot of different industries. Um, Pretty much any kind of tax problem that somebody has, we can help with.
Yeah, makes sense. I've yeah,
Yeah,
looking through your history and talking to you and kind of getting to know you. Yeah, there's really no type of dispute that you can't assist with in some type of way. So I'd encourage you if you've gotten any value out of this or you're running into issues, you're a fantastic resource. And if you can't help somebody, you know somebody who can. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be the guy to help them out.
that's right.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. Yeah, for joining me today. I really appreciate you coming on. This was a fun conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you bet. We'll chat soon.
Okay, thanks a lot. Take it easy.